Welcome one, welcome all. Thank you for tuning in to Cedarly Radio, your guide to films playing at the Art House for the week of June 28th to July 4th. My name is Aaron Spears.
And I'm Dave Huffman. On this week's episode, we'll be discussing Toni Morrison, The Pieces I Am, and Yesterday.
We'll also be discussing audience expectation in films. Robert Pattinson just seems to be everywhere. And our Cedarly 3 picks for overlooked films of 2019. Well, we always like to start up the show the last scene first because we're a little backwards that way. So, Dave, what's the last film you've seen?
I finally got caught up with a movie that I was sadly missed last year. I saw Drew Goddard's Bad Times at the El Royale.
Oh, I forgot all about that movie.
And so did everybody else. It was a complete flop, and I don't understand why. It got very good reviews. It's extremely entertaining. It's got an amazing cast full of stars.
Yeah.
And, you know, it was kind of compared to like Tarantino-esque or whatever, but it is definitely Tarantino in the way that it's sort of structured, but it certainly isn't anyone trying to do Tarantino dialogue, which always fails. Like whenever you see those filmmakers that have like grown up on Tarantino and they think I can write like that, and you're like, no, you can't, and it's just insufferable whenever you're...
I feel like what's the guy that did Brawl in Cell Block 99 and Dragged Across Concrete?
Yeah, he's got a little of that.
He's the one who's come the closest, because I've actually enjoyed a couple of his movies, and I was like, he's kind of, because he's doing his own twist almost, but he's got that kind of hyper...
but he has a different kind of, I mean, he, like Tarantino, has long passages of dialogue and stuff, but his style of speaking is nothing like Tarantino.
Right.
But this movie, Drew Goddard, he's obviously an amazing screenwriter. You know, he was Oscar nominated for The Martian, and he directed my favorite film of a few years ago, Cabin in the Woods.
Cabin in the Woods, yeah.
Kind of genre twisting, great little horror comedy. And this movie, again, I think maybe that's why it didn't work for audiences, because it completely defies audience audience expectations. People, when they go to see a movie, most people kind of want to know what they're getting, and this movie completely surprises you at every turn, and that's what made it so much fun, and I would highly recommend it. I'm so glad I finally got to see it, and I'm mad I didn't see it in the theater.
I'm going to add that. I just wrote it down on my growing list of films I need to find.
I would legitimately say top of the list. I was really, really impressed by it. Thought it was great.
Audience expectations comes up a lot in the kind of art house world too, because we always joke that people want, just like a scaled down version of Hollywood stuff, which, Fox Searchlight is good at finding like the smaller mid-sized movies, or putting those out that are basically kind of, audience friendly, PG-13, multiplex kind of movies. They just don't necessarily have the biggest stars or, huge budget or production to it. There's nothing wrong with them. It's just that seems to go over very well in the art house. But then when you get like original, when we get to our Cedarly 3 list, I have a bunch of stuff this year that was like original, thought-provoking, probably a little challenging, which is what I think of when I think of the art house. But that, like you said, that messes with audience expectations. And if you don't really know how to process, some crazy European art film right away, it feels like, I don't think I like that. It's like, talk about it, give it some time. But people seem like they do really want to know what they're getting into. But then they also complain that like there's no surprises and everything's cliche. And
yeah, exactly.
It's weird.
They complain that they want to see something different. Then sometimes when they see something different, they don't know how to deal with it.
Right.
And what was the last thing you saw, Aaron?
I finally caught up with, we're finally catching up with several movies now. I caught up with one I just bought because I really wanted to see it, and I really like John Hawkes as an actor quite a bit. So a couple years ago, he did a movie called Lowdown with Elle Fanning.
Oh, yeah.
And Glenn Close. Lena Headey from Game of Thrones, and Peter Dinklage. They both have small parts in it as well. And I don't think anybody, did you see this one?
I did, yeah.
And it seemed like, and Flea, the musician, he's in it too, in a really interesting part. I got it just because I wanted to see John Hawkes' performance. It's a feature film debut for the director Jeff Priest, I think his name is. He's done a lot of music video work in the 90s. So he adapted the memoir of Amy Jo Albany about her dad, Joe Albany, who was, I don't think necessarily famous, but was a jazz pianist. And his role is sort of that like studio musician that all the big names loved. Right. It's also set in 70s Hollywood. So I was like, you got me right there. But it's like that seedy, underbelly of Hollywood with, a lot of prostitution, a lot of drug use, but it's through Elle Fanning's character's eyes, Amy Jo, as she's like, adores her father. Her mom's kind of in and out of the picture. It had the feel a little bit of one of my favorite films from the last couple years, Leave No Trace, where it's a troubled troubled-ish, I guess, father-daughter relationship, but it's told through the kind of the teen or the kid's eyes from like their perspective. So you don't really know exactly all of what's going on, but you get, as an adult watching it, you're like, oh, I know I know what I'm hearing through the walls there. Or I know what that means. Or, I know what when those adults give that look, I know what that means. So it was not the PG version that, you got with Leave No Trace. This is definitely like a rated R version. Cause like I said, there's a lot of, there's some drugs, a little bit of violence and, more adult themes going on. But John Hawkes continues to me to turn in performances that are very similar, but also usually really unique. I don't know. I can't pin him down just yet because he's done like just broad comedies. He's done a romantic comedy with Helen Hunt back then a few years ago that we showed, The Sessions.
Oh, yeah. I forgot all about that movie.
But the ones that always stand out in my head are like The Winter's Bone, the Marcy May Marlene. I think I got that right. Where he's the cult leader. I know you disagree on this one, but Too Late, where he's like the detective in LA from a few years back.
You mean the worst movie of the decade thus far? Yeah. Talking about people that were raised on Tarantino and think they can do Tarantino.
Oh, yeah, actually, you're right. You're right. Yeah, very much. But I still like that one.
That is the most egregious example. Oh, insufferable. I've never wanted to get up and walk out of a movie more than that one, but I was polite and sat through the entire thing. Horrible. Thank you for bringing up the emotional scars.
Yeah. I think that was during that film festival because we got in an argument about it in the lobby. I think at Tower City. It
was just an insufferable, painful, terrible, overwritten. It's not that I think that director doesn't have talent at directing films potentially, but he should never be allowed to write another screenplay.
Well, I say watch it, but that's just me. I wasn't expecting to get that much of a visceral reaction.
Yeah, no. I think it should come with some sort of like government warning on it. It's really sorry.
That's all right.
That's one of those movies that just sets me off. In case you can't tell.
Well, it's one of those that's like 5 scenes and they're all done in one shot, and I love the gimmick of that. But I do appreciate like the gimmick did kind of hurt the narrative several times there, but I still thought like he was a good commanding lead, and I thought the premise was pretty interesting, and the gimmick kind of held me over. Plus, there was that extended scene at the drive-in, which I thought was great. So
yeah, but then they kept talking in just the most horrible way.
So the dialogue was pretty rough at a few spots.
Yeah, gratuitous female nudity for no reason other than just like, I'm going to be cool and edgy and have a naked lady just walking around in a whole scene for no reason because I got her to do it. Yeah, it was pretty terrible. Yeah, I hated that movie. Okay, so let's talk about something positive. Let's talk about what people saw this weekend at the Cedar Lee and what they actually liked. So this weekend, the big thing that everyone was coming out to see was Pavarotti, as we expected.
Yeah.
Continuing the trend of people responding to great documentaries about amazing, culturally significant people in our world, and Pavarotti's, fans came out. Everybody really loved that movie. It was by far the biggest movie we had here this weekend.
Well, also helps too that we've been showing the Met for so long, so I think it's good that like Cedar Lee's kind of known for like showing some opera, and it's also built up an opera fan base, especially now that we can show it live.
Yes,
that definitely helps. But also, like we said last week, Pavarotti is. I mean, like I mentioned last week, as a teenage kid, like I knew who he was, and I do not know opera, so.
Yes, he is definitely on the Mount Rushmore of operatic stars. And then we also had Last Black Man in San Francisco. It opened up a little quietly, but the people that came to see it really enjoyed it. So it's getting a good response from the audiences that have come out to see it. So I'd encourage people to come to see that. I don't know that one's going to be with us as long. So if you're wanting to see that film, you should probably not delay too long to see it.
Yeah, speaking of like I was saying, like what I was sort of expect out of the art house, that's like a new, fresh voice telling a story in a new, interesting, very visual way that people really haven't seen before. So I wouldn't necessarily describe it as challenging, I guess, the way I kind of described some other ones earlier. But, it's definitely, would you say like it defies audience expectation, or because the premise is fairly simple? Yeah,
the premise is very simple, but I think it's
just so well done.
It's very well done, and it's done in a different sort of way. You know what I mean?
Right,
like
right.
It has an almost poetic quality to it as
Yeah.
opposed to naturalistic.
Right.
So I thought, but at the same time, it feels real. You know, it's not like, I know, was it Blind Spotting last year, which I felt didn't ever fully have that right tone, so that there was elements when it kind of left the realm of reality that it sort of jolted me out of it. And
Right.
this film, I felt like the entire time had the right tone throughout the entire movie.
Yeah.
So I enjoyed that.
Well, it also just happens that you're wrong about Blind Spotting, but I don't want to start another conversation.
No,
like that right
I
away.
like Blind Spotting. I don't. I think Blind Spotting is a good movie.
Yeah.
I just think that they should have, maybe planted. And I think you said that even in some of the deleted scenes, that stuff is in there.
Yeah,
And I
there's
think it
more
would've
kind of
helped.
freestyle between
Yeah.
the two. Yeah.
Right.
But-
So that would have, I think, made it less jarring when it happened towards the end.
Yeah.
That's all.
So,
okay.
I found one article this week that I thought tied in perfectly, since we're going to be talking about Danny Boyle's new movie here in just a moment. So I guess it's probably one of those things where he was doing an interview about his new movie yesterday, and was asked some other questions, or they had a little digression during the conversation. So IndieWire had this article up where I don't know if it was the headline or not, but the link was like, Danny Boyle wants Robert Pattinson as James Bond. And I'd forgotten that Danny Boyle was set to direct a James Bond movie, and then
Yes,
I think it was one of those creative differences, sort of.
Exactly. Yes,
situations?
he left over creative differences with the Broccoli family, or Broccoli. Is it Broccoli or Broccoli? Either way, the people that own the James Bond franchise.
Yeah, the Bond owners.
Yes, they absolutely. They have a history of having creative differences with filmmakers.
That's what it seems like. I haven't followed James Bond outside of, I think, maybe 2-3 of the movies over the years, so I don't know the history of that franchise too well.
I'm a big fan of those. So.
Well, do you think he would have worked out as a James Bond?
He could have been okay. He's a little kind of, I don't know, but I'm fascinated. I don't see him necessarily in that role. I think he's a little maybe too sensitive as I perceive him in most things.
True.
So I think it's interesting that he's cast now as Batman. So it'll be interesting to see him kind of, maybe show more of an edge than he ever has before. So
I think that seems like a better fit to me, but in my head too, like I'm still waiting to, like, I'll get interested in James Bond as soon as Idris Elba is playing James Bond. That's my take on the franchise.
I think that he would have been great.
Yeah.
I think Idris Elba would have been a perfect choice.
But in that same article, I didn't realize, like, I forgot not Idris Elba, but Robert Pattinson has been cast as the Batman. He's also in Christopher Nolan's new movie. He was almost in the Bond movie. So as we've been appreciating him for a few years doing like the edgier art house movies, it seems like he's maybe, set to oscillate back to, mainstream Hollywood stuff.
He's ready to get a paycheck again.
Right, exactly. So I don't imagine his Twilight money is running out just yet, but going into, a Christopher Nolan movie, those are just giant Hollywood events at this point. And I think the Batman, he's signed on for a couple of those movies. So
I think it's a three picture deal. So
is it possible we're going to end up seeing a Joaquin Phoenix, Robert Pattinson, Batman, Joker movie then? Because
that would be amazing.
Me. Yeah.
Yeah, that would be great. I'm very excited to see the Joker, the Joaquin Phoenix, the kind of strange take on the Joker origin story. So it'll be interesting.
Yeah, like the Joker as Rupert Pupkin kind of vibe they're giving off there.
Fascinating.
Well, speaking of Danny Boyle, we'll be right back with the new movies that are opening this week at the theater. Well, the first new film we are opening this week is a documentary straight from the Cleveland International Film Festival a couple months ago. It is Toni Morrison, The Pieces I Am, from director Timothy Greenfield-Sanders. It's an artful and intimate meditation on the legendary storyteller. It examines her life, her work, and the powerful themes that she has confronted throughout her literary career.
I don't know where this woman's energy came from to raise 2 kids, to bring other people of color to the party, and also write these novels.
Toni was an editor at Random House.
Navigating a white male world was not threatening. It wasn't even interesting. I was more interesting than they were. And I wasn't afraid to show it.
I don't know if this is the way that you're supposed to watch stuff at the festival, Dave, but when I got off work, I did catch like the last 15, 20 minutes just standing in the back of the theater of this one because I really did want to see it. And it in its description, you're saying it was an artful and intimate meditation. It does have, it's not just your standard kind of talking head documentary about a person, although that is there. It is a bit more like you said, that kind of thoughtful, and it gets a little bit deeper into the themes that she's chosen to write about throughout her literary career, more than just like, hey, she wrote this book, it was a hit, it made a movie. You know, it gets a little bit more into also her professional work life as well.
Yeah, because she's a teacher, is that correct? I believe as well, and she is
but like in the publishing world too. Like she wasn't just author, editor, everything else.
Yeah, because in addition to being an author, she she was the first female Black senior editor at Random House, and so she was a trailblazer in the kind of professional field in literature as well as just being like an author. She was, behind the scenes. So, whenever you don't hear a lot about people that work in that kind of the professional field also having professional success as an author, most
because it's so time consuming. I mean, just being, I mean, that's like the gatekeeper at a major, like one of the major publishing houses. But then also I happen to be this like immensely talented, literary genius that can, put out these books that really connect with the zeitgeist in a very powerful way.
And somehow I was not aware that she was born in Lorain, Ohio. So she's actually a local person. So God love her. So I had no idea.
I mean, I don't know. Yeah, that seemed like that would have popped up in my radar. I'm just like, oh yeah, someone locally there too. But so then, as I tend to do when I'm getting excited for a certain movie, I didn't recognize Timothy Greenfield-Sanders, the director, as a name. Like, oh, I wonder what else he's directed. And so he's primarily been working at, again, dual professions here. He's been a very famous photographer. One of the things I found on him was there's like several hundred prints of his portraits that are in like the Museum of Modern Art. So fully, professional, celebrated photographer. But he's also been a filmmaker for a little while, doing what a couple reviews I read were called the List series. One was like the Blacklist. I think one was an LGBTQ themed list. It was like these portraits of people that were like kind of on the outskirts of the entertainment world that weren't getting, kind of the spotlight the way that, you would hope that, diversity of opinions and approaches would in that world. So, the Blacklist was about, Black artists that weren't really in the mainstream that try to, shed a little light on these. And the reviews for some of these docs are very much what the reviews are coming in for the Toni Morrison doc, where they're very artful, they're very intimate. He's good with like portrait photography, but also like kind of the portrait interview in a lot of cases, and getting people to really open up. Kind of as the kind of like that Errol Morris interview vibe, where like it's real intimate, just that person and the camera, telling their story.
Very cool. The other film that we're going to be opening this week is Yesterday by Danny Boyle. And this is a new romantic comedy about a struggling musician who, after a strange incident, realizes he's the only person on earth who can remember the Beatles and kind of takes credit for writing all of their songs.
Oh, I believe in yesterday.
Why did you write that?
I didn't write it. Paul McCartney wrote it. The Beatles.
Who?
John, Paul, George and Ringo, the Beatles. No. Stop it. Yesterday. It's one of the greatest songs ever written.
Well, it's not Coldplay. It's not Fix You.
Do you genuinely not know who the Beatles are?
Genuinely.
Then I'm in a really, really, really complicated situation.
So, Dave, this is going to open up a can of worms. We had last fall on a couple of shows when A Star Was Born was coming out and Blaze. And is this film a musical?
I would put this under the non-traditional musical
Non-traditional
category.
musical, yeah.
We did a show, yeah. It's not the break out into song musical. It is definitely performance musical. So it is, but it's a charming movie that's getting mostly good reviews. Some people have thought it's a little light, but I think that's because Danny Boyle has had such amazing films in the past, like Slumdog Millionaire and things like that. So whenever you raise the bar a little high, I think whenever you come out with something that's just light and entertaining, people kind of look at it with a slightly more critical eye.
That's really true. Or like they're trying to find more to it than maybe was necessarily intended as well in this case. I like that genre of performance musical you just said rather than non-traditional. I think I'm going to start using that instead. Okay. Well, because this is also a separate interesting genre where it's using pre-existing songs, pop songs, very like some of the most famous songs actually in like pop music history, which There's another one coming up. I don't know if it's going to end up going the art house route or not, called Blinded by the Light, that does the same thing, but for Bruce Springsteen music.
Bruce Springsteen music, yeah.
Which, so I was like, well, then that's the story of Mamma Mia. That's the story of like Rock of Ages. Like it is its own kind of separate musical genre of using, or even Moulin Rouge, really.
Well, except for all of those other ones like Mamma Mia and Rock of Ages. Those are jukebox musicals, as they call them, because those are people that do break into song in a kind of more traditional musical sense.
Oh, right.
Like,
yeah.
It's not just someone like singing a song on a stage like you're getting in Yesterday. It is kind of conveying the story. Mamma Mia does it pretty effectively, how they structured, this very light little plot and was able to work in the themes of ABBA music to it. Works pretty well, actually.
Right. I was looking at more just from like the music itself. Like they just picked like a musical artist and just stuck with all of their music for the whole movie. But I guess that is a jukebox musical.
Yes, that's what those are called. Yeah.
I mean, I've heard that on like the stage for Broadway, but I hadn't thought about that for film yet. But
yeah, I think that's
that's perfect.
Translate over. Yeah.
So is there again with like the directors though, like Danny Boyle's one of those directors that I guess like I'm occasionally a huge fan of, but then he doesn't seem like he seems like one of those like journeyman, like old classic studio kind of directors where he's constantly putting out stuff, but there's not necessarily a specific through line between like Trainspotting and Steve Jobs and 127 Hours and Millions and Sunshine. Like he kind of seems like he hops genres and is pretty adept at almost everything he does.
Yeah, with the exception of Millions, which I didn't really care for. But I really did. For the most part, I do like his films, and he is a filmmaker that I always pay attention to. And every year, I think, God, I don't even know how many years we played the stage production of Frankenstein that he directed.
From the National Theater, yeah.
National Theater. So he's done some interesting stage work as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, he's a really brilliant director, and I like whenever he obviously Trainspotting kind of put him on the map and has such a kinetic kind of style to it, but that didn't become like
what he does
signature style.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like he does it whenever it's right for the story. It's not like I'm just going to do all this quick cuts and a lot of camera work and things like that. It's just if the story doesn't warrant it, he doesn't do it.
Well, to keep it British, he hasn't Guy Ritchied it the whole way through his career.
I didn't know you could use Guy Ritchie as a verb.
Yeah, I am now because that seems to be what he did.
There you go.
And in this one too, he's also working with Richard Curtis, which is like the who's who of like British directors and screenwriters. Yeah. I mean, the guy that gave us Four Weddings and a Funeral and Notting Hill and Bridget Jones and Blackadder, Mr. Bean. I mean, it's a powerhouse matchup there between writer and director in this case, and the band itself. I mean, the Beatles. Come on, it's couldn't be a more Anglophile movie for you, Dave.
That is true.
All right, well, we will be right back with our Cedarly 3 picks for this week. So each week we like to take inspiration from one of the new films opening at the theater and suggest 3 films to broaden your cinematic world. This week, though, we took inspiration from the calendar rather than a movie because it's the end of June, so the film year of 2019 is half over. So we decided to go back and take a look at our list, what we've seen this year, and kind of highlight a few that you definitely want to catch up with because they're probably going to be on your top 10 list, in 6 more months. But at this point, a lot of these are streaming or available for purchase in your library. So, Dave, as you go back to make your list here, I wanted to ask you, you have a star ranking system like in your personal film journal?
Yes. I was looking at my list, and I rate everything on a, sort of like a letter grade, sort of, whenever they figure out your GPA, like an A is worth 4 points, a B is worth 3 points, that kind of thing. So that's kind of the scale that I use when I rate films. So I was looking at the films that either got 3.5 and above to sort of, single a few titles out, and then weeding out the ones that were more mainstream, like we don't need to talk about Avengers Endgame on here.
No, we don't.
Some of the other things that are still playing. So there are some films that maybe will end up on my top 10 list that I'm not talking about yet. So the first film I actually want to talk about is a film we just played over at the Capitol a few weeks ago, and that is the Chinese action film Shadow by Zhang Yimou. I can never say his name because my my American
tongue,
German tongue just does not want to say it right. So, but anyway, it's an amazing movie. It's one of the most visually beautiful things I've seen on the big screen in a long time, and it saddens me that not a lot of people got to see it on the big screen whenever we were showing it. So I'd encourage you to check it out as soon as you can.
That's funny you mentioned that one, because as I was going through just like films that have been released this year, and I started my list of what I saw to pick out my favorites, but then as usually happens when I do this sort of list, I have a longer list of stuff that I did miss that I need to catch up with before the calendar year's up. And Shadow was near the top of that list because it's like, oh, crap, I forgot about that one. Oh, I forgot about that one too. So another Seedly 3 where my alternative list ended up being longer than my actual list of 3.
Gotcha.
First one I want to mention is also a foreign film. It's one I caught at the Cleveland International Film Festival a couple months ago that should be out just in general for people to find any time now, called Close Enemies. It was a French film that I don't remember if I mentioned on the show or not yet, but it's you're gonna have to do this pronunciation for me. Matthias Schoenhardt.
Matthias Schoenhardt.
We watched that YouTube video where they mispronounced his name so many times. I can't remember what his actual pronunciation is anymore.
Yeah, no, you did talk about this one whenever. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, but it's a great French kind of Departed crime drama. 2 guys that grew up together. One goes cop, one goes bad guy. Still very much both ingrained in the neighborhood and kind of work in the system on both of their ends. But I really feel strongly that this is a genre of movie, whether it's, French or any other country out there as a foreign film to us Americans, that I feel like should do so much better here in the States, because it's on the edge of being an action movie, but it's a really good thriller that adults who want to go see a good movie would really enjoy seeing. But I don't know how, to market those or to get the word out, like, hey, you should go see this movie, especially, in a theatrical environment. But this is one of those that, like, I think it would be quite a hit if audiences knew about it and went to see it, which is the general problem of most movies.
I went to see that one at the film festival as well, and or I didn't go see it at the film festival. I missed it, is what I meant to say. But a film that I did get to see that played at the film festival that we also just played here at the Cedar Lee was Hail Satan, the documentary about the Satanic Temple, and it is just a wildly entertaining, very informative doc that I think that the title really hurt it, because I think people thought it was, not that it's anti-Satanic Temple, but it's also not the movie that you think it is. And it kind of shows what today's Satanists are. And they're more really kind of, in some ways, social activists and First Amendment rights defenders than they are about any kind of religious notion of what Satan is. And I thought it was just a great documentary. Didn't you have it? You had an alternative title that you mentioned briefly to me after you saw it. That was like, if it would have been called something like The Devil and the First Amendment,
that's what it was.
Something like that.
Yeah.
The movie would have done really, really well, or certainly better. But calling it Hail Satan ? Was a little like, I don't know. Do I want to hail Satan? But after you watch the movie, you might go, huh? Because when you watch the film, like I'm forgetting what it's like the however many tenets there are. It's like, it's not their 10 commandments. It's like their equivalent of the 10 commandments. They are the most logical, sensical things you've ever heard in your life.
Yeah.
They're like, do no harm to anybody else. It's
like, everything you're just like, that makes sense. Yeah, that makes sense.
It is the most, like, everything about it. You're like, huh? After you hear them go, maybe I am a Satanist. Right. I never thought I could be. Yeah. So,
but like you said, maybe
that's where the question mark comes from.
It's another audience expectation thing, because you see that title and even the poster to it. I mean, if you could at least just watch the trailer, you go like, oh, I'm interested in that movie, because they put that front and center in the trailer that it's, First Amendment issues and free speech issues.
It's a very funny movie as well, and informative, and I really encourage people to check it out whenever it's streaming and available in other ways.
That was next on my list. It wasn't particularly that movie, but it was my cheat listing of, once again, the docs of 2019 so far. Biggest Little Farm, Apollo 11, Amazing Grace. I even really liked the Dueling Fire Festival documentaries. I thought were pretty fascinating early on in the year. And then I haven't seen Pavarotti yet, but like that one is also like, that's doing gangbusters. So it's another one of those where the little, well, not necessarily little, but like, the obscure French movie that would do really well with American audiences, I think, isn't connecting with audiences, but somehow theatrically documentaries are still, connecting and doing very well. Obviously, the Fire ones didn't go to the theaters, but the rest of them were all out in the theaters and hits, which I love. because it's also confounding because to me, docs for the longest time have been the ones that I grab the DVD from the library or I, hit a streaming service and there's so many documentary options. The fact that they're actually connecting with audiences and making money at the art house to me for the last several years now is confounding, but great. So I didn't have a specific title there. I just, the docs again are all of all those. I'm going to say Apollo 11. Apollo 11. Everybody needs to catch up with because
that's the one.
Yeah, that's the one.
I was going to say you're cheating again.
I'm cheating again with a bunch, but I'll focus on Apollo 11.
Mentioning 20 movies for your
right.
list.
I'll just stream of consciousness. 15 movie titles, and there we go.
Okay. Well, I'm just going to stick to one more then, and it's a film we even mentioned earlier today, and that was High Life, the Robert Pattinson. Claire Denis film, that the science fiction movie, which was just a beautiful, strange, contemplative film that I really enjoyed, and I think that people's expectations about what the trailer kind of made it look like. I think some people were a little surprised that it was as sexual as it was, I think, when they saw the film.
Right.
But it was a very good movie and a great film to see in the theater.
Yeah, highly visual, and it's... The more I've thought about that one too, I'm really looking forward to going back and revisiting that one because it was one of those, like, I'm aware of her career, except for I think I'm missing one feature that she's done that I haven't seen. So like I knew to expect the unexpected, or she might go to interesting places that you wouldn't get out of an American film. And this, was an English language film of hers. But there are a lot of surprises. I thought, fantastic surprises along the way that now that I know the full story and what happens, I really want to revisit it because she's really good at layering in different themes and ideas that you don't necessarily pick up on the first watch. Also this one that American audiences aren't used to this much sexuality, I don't think, in films these days, which is unfortunate. But it's, I think that shocked a lot of audiences as well. It's a gooey film at some points, and it's very fluids are featured very heavily in the movie, and that I could see that kind of confounding people in the moment, and maybe not really fully appreciating what she's really actually trying to do with this story in the long run. The last film I want to mention is just one title.
Okay.
Because I feel like it's criminally underseen, and if it isn't easily like the best actress award, in like 8 or 9 months from now, it probably won't be, and I'm going to be super pissed, is Her Smell, Alex Ross Perry's film. With Elizabeth Moss at the central role. I mean, I already raved about it on the show, so I'll keep it short and sweet. Go watch it. Find it somewhere when it's out and available because it is very rewarding. And
I second that, and I almost put it on my list as well. So
I did the same thing with High Life, where I was like, I don't know, maybe. But no, Her Smell just, it's, it's a little bit longer, I guess, if that's something that you worry about, because it's like a little over 2 hours. But I thought it flies by. It's essentially just like 5 or 6 scenes, like extended take scenes that encapsulate the the downward spiral of someone who's immensely talented but has substance abuse issues, has some serious, out of check ego problems, and just how you can have a vortex that just like pulls people in but also just destroys them as well.
Yeah, well, the structure of that movie is almost plays like 2 separate 1 hour long films.
It does,
so
yeah.
You've got really a very defined first act and a defined second act, and therefore I didn't think that the film ever felt long to me because it's like you're watching this whole first act of like self-destruction, and then the second act is this compelling kind of,
redemption,
put the pieces back together.
Yeah.
So it's really well done, and she is amazing, and she'll be this year's Toni Collette, where we talk about it, like the best performance of the year that doesn't get an Oscar nomination.
Yeah, 100%. Well, even too in the second, we'll say like Act 2, the second half of it, when supposedly she's on the road to recovery and it's the big comeback, it's still such a volcanic performance because you're not sure if she's gonna, because like she seems capable of anything, and like this may not end happily for anybody. It's still just such like a knife's edge kind of performance where there's like little hints of like, oh no, she's getting her act together, and then we're like, oh no, that's not good. So it really is an exercise in tension when it comes back. For that second half there. Well, on next week's show, we are going to be deviating from our format just a little bit because it's the 4th of July holiday week. We were going to do a preview of the late shift. We always program the late shift, first half of the year, second half of the year. So the second half of the year titles are out and available at clevelandcinemas.com. We're going to kind of go through the films in the second half of the year lineup and kind of preview some of the selections that were made and why they were chosen for the upcoming late shift series. If you have any favorites that you've enjoyed as far as like late shift movies or cult films go, please send them our way at Cedarly Theater using the hashtag Cedarly3, the number 3. But before we sign off for this week, we always like to let you know about some of the special events that we have coming up here at the theater. Dave, you know I'm excited for one of these specifically.
I know you're extremely excited.
It makes me feel old that it's the 30th anniversary, but I didn't see Do the Right Thing when it was in theaters originally. I caught that one later on when it was on VHS, so I guess that still makes me feel a little old because it was VHS. But Do the Right Thing is playing Sunday, June 30th at 4 p.m. and 9:30 p.m. for its 30th anniversary presentation. It's also playing at the Capitol Theater at 7 p.m. on June 30th.
Yeah, so you've got 3 chances to see truly one of the great American films from the 80s. So I'd encourage you to come back and see that.
And if you time it right, I think you can see it 3 times in one day.
You could actually. Absolutely. You easily could. You could see it here at Cedar, go have a dinner break, and then go see it at the Capitol, and then drive back to this side of town and see it again. Is that what you're going to do, Aaron?
I love Spike Lee, but I don't know that if it was 3 different ones in a row, yes. But the same one 3 times sounds a little exhausting.
Well, I'm looking forward to seeing it back on the big screen.
Yeah,
so
me too.
Great. And then we also have continuing the 2019 Ghibli Fest presented by G Kids and Fathom. We have Whisper of the Heart. That's playing Monday, July 1st at 7 p.m. And that is directed by Yoshifumi Kondo. And this is a dubbed presentation.
And then on Wednesday, July 3rd at 10 a.m., the continuing Dollar Family Film Series is Christmas in July with Dr. Seuss's The Grinch. Again, Wednesday, July 3rd at 10 a.m. All of the films in the Family Film Series are just $1. As always, thank you for tuning in to Cedar Lee Radio and lending us your ears this week. All the music heard on the show is original music written by Grant Heineman and performed by the New Heights Jazz Ensemble. Used with their permission, of course. Visit clevelandcinemas.com for correct showtimes and to purchase advance tickets. Also, there are links in the show notes. You can use those if you'd like as well. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. We are at Cedar Lee Theater, spelled with an R-E at the end because we're fancy like that. Don't forget to subscribe to the show wherever you find your podcast, and while you're subscribing, leave us a rating and review, or better yet, tell a fellow film geek about the show. We'll see you at the movies.